All right, guys. Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles. Follow along as we continue in our study through the Gospel of Matthew. And like yes, Matthew has some great. It is the life of Jesus. Again, I want to remind us too that the four Gospels is the main sources for the record of Jesus. And we saw that really in the opening statement, that the record of generations of Jesus. And so it is a historical document as well as a revelation from God as to who the Son is. And remember, it is also a specific revelation. In other words, the Gospels is meant to give us a specific telling, a specific revelation message revealing of who Jesus is. All right, so we're in chapter 5. And Jesus, again, is telling his disciples, those who call themselves his disciples, this is who he's speaking to. Those who have been they've been following Jesus. As I said, if you wanted to put it guesstimate in terms of the time, we're almost a year into the public ministry of Jesus as Matthew is telling it. So as I said, this is not a biopic. This is not a blow by blow of the life of Jesus. He's telling us the things he wants us to know. So we're about a year into the public ministry of Jesus, and around this time he begins to tell them this is his criteria for what being a disciple. His disciple is not just being a religious person. There is a terminology today that you hear people saying that they are a spiritual person. Okay? Now, I often don't even know what that means. I know what a biblical definition is, but when you hear people say that, and usually it seems to be a mixture of philosophical wise dash of religion, but not hardcore in any sense of the way. So when people say that they are spiritual, oftentimes, again, it's not a biblical, meaning. Jesus is giving us, again, his criteria for what the law is. And one of the things I want to also say again, when we go back to the Beatitudes, and sure, hi Monique, God bless you. I am answering questions. So I'm answering questions if they're pretty much, as we're going to get into the lesson, but sure, shoot your questions. And but what I might do is give a quick answer if it's so it won't take too long away from the study. But and then if it's involved, maybe we will tackle it more in depth if need be at the end of the lesson. So yes, shoot your questions, especially as we are moving along with the study. Questions are welcome. Yes. All right, so as we started with the people call them the Beatitudes. They're not the Beatitudes. They are qualities. Did I take them down too? I didn't mean to, but anyway, Jesus makes this statement. First and foremost, he tells us, blessed are he gives us different qualities like, blessed are the poor in the spirit. And again, he didn't say blessed are the poor. He said blessed are the poor in spirit. These are spiritual conditions, spiritual qualities. And then as we move on, as we're going to see, I'm doing where am I at here? Okay, I did take it down, but all right. So this is the purpose. He says, and this is Matthew chapter 5. So, and talking about the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, again, is giving his criteria for what, excuse me, being his disciples. And so he says, you're the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can it be made salty? So that's purpose. In other words, you would never have salt if it's not salty. If it's not have a salt taste to it, it's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled by men. Verse 14, you are the light of the world. City situated on a hill cannot be hidden. He says, no one lights a lamp and puts it on a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and gives light for all in the house. In the same way that your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And then he says, let me go back. Verse 17, don't assume that I've come to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. So, again, I'm kind of doing a quick review of where we have been going with this sermon. And one of the things is to understand, especially when we get into our next session where we're going to pick up at where we left off last time, because oftentimes people wonder about, are Christians weak, docile? And part of the issue here is not that. Let me go back to this, because when I want to read this again. He says, verse 14, let your light, you are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. And the point of this statement is that God places us where we can be seen. When he says, let your light shine, he says, so then oftentimes we are placed where we can be seen. So he says, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on the lampstand. It gives light for all who are in the house. There's something else I wanted to read. All right. I accidentally took it out, but I didn't mean to. Okay. There was a statement, remember, where he says, unless your righteousness exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. What we have been going through is a series, Jesus contrasting what would you think it would be like following the 10 Commandments. And this is, remember, in direct conflict with what during the time the Pharisees were teaching. And the Pharisees were the holy, pious men of the day. In other words, you would look at them and go, well, look at them. Look at what they wear. Look at how they dress. Sounds familiar today? And then people would say, oh, these guys are really, really holy. And then what they were teaching the people is the commandments. And so, remember, I accidentally took it off. I didn't mean to. But one of the things that he had talked about was I took it out. Jesus made the statement, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees. Now the Pharisees were strict, methodical, meticulous in keeping the commandments of Moses. To the point they eventually became hypocrites, because they began to form interpretations of the commandments. And as we move on into the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to see the battle. Remember, I said that Matthew is, of all of the Gospel, the most Jewish of the Gospels. In that we're going to see more reference to Jewish law, customs, and traditions. The Pharisees will attack Jesus and accuse Jesus of breaking the law. And Jesus never broke the law. What he violated was their interpretations of the law. Now, what Jesus has been doing also is that he's been, people who are religious and they kind of rest in their religion and they become kind of self-righteous. So if I tell you, and this would be a true statement, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, I don't curse, right? So, I could feel pious about myself, right? Especially if you do those things. I don't do those things, but, oh man. Well, Jesus has been kind of going a lot deeper, hasn't he? Let's look at some of the things again. Look at, like for verse 21, he says, "You have heard it was said to our ancestors, do not murder." Right? I could brag on that. I haven't murdered anyone. He says, "Whoever murders would be subject to the judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother would be subject to judgment." Now, the reason why, again, again, he's contrasting, saying that, look, how do you achieve righteousness with God? And you cannot achieve it if you think you're following a set of precepts, commandments, religious ideologies. That's his point. In other words, where all of this is going to go is you walk away from a lot of these commandments that Jesus gave, and they're impossible to keep, right? Think about it. Some of these commandments are impossible. He says, if you're angry with your brother, he goes into the heart, the very heart, the thoughts, and says, God judges your thoughts, right? God judges your thoughts. If you're angry with your brother, you're in trouble with God. Remember, he says, where am I at here? I'm going to pick it up at verse 32. Notice he says that this is a good one. In verse 23, he said, if you're offering your gift on the altar and you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar and first go be reconciled with your brother. Now, this is something now that we as a Christian kind of community don't really push reconciliation the way we should. In other words, we don't look at it the way God tells us we ought to look at it. We don't, we get so hung up in the same routine of church, right? We come to church every Sunday. We go through our worship time, our praise time, our offering giving time, and then we listen to the word. And one of the attitudes of Christians today, and this is the application that Jesus would say for us to pay attention to, that we can make, that we can draw from this, is that, and this is probably the greatest thought you can think about. When your religion is so man-centered, right? In other words, what I do, and that's what we're going to see this movie as we move through, because this Sermon on the Mount, remember, is chapters 5, 6, and 7. And so the idea is that I'm so focused on what I need to do. Every religion, every one of them, every religion, and even within Christianity, the denominations, is human effort, man's effort to get to God. In other words, the endeavor, what they teach, what they practice. I have to do something. You remember, I made this statement where I used to you hear people say, I'm just trying to make heaven my home, or I want to be ready when he comes. And what we're reading here is you cannot meet these qualities requirements. And so as Paul said, and I think it's in Romans, Christ is the end of the law. See, Christ is the end of the law. So that's why, remember he said that if you, oh, did I miss that? I think, yeah. How did I miss this? Here it is, verse 27. You have heard it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, for everyone who looks upon a woman, the lust of her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Look at verse 29. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your parts of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Now I'll get more into this when Jesus talked about hell a lot. Remember, Jesus probably talked more about hell than anyone. And right there he does give, now get this, he does give the eternal consequences of what? Really not having faith in him. Now his point here is, and again, it almost seems extreme, but as I said, you have to keep this in context. He's talking to his disciples, and he is comparing the traditional, and I'm going to say false applications that the Pharisees were making. And so the people were thinking, in order to be righteous with God, I have to follow the precepts of the Pharisees. And this is what Jesus is destroying. In other words, if you attempt to say, I want to be righteous before God by keeping the commandments of the law, he says you have to go a lot deeper. So you can say, I haven't committed murder, but yet God goes a lot deeper. How about if you're angry with your brother? You may say, I haven't committed the act of adultery. Well, Jesus says, but hey, if the lust is in your heart, God says you're guilty. So yeah, so the idea is that you can almost say this is an impossible thing to keep. Well, yeah, that's his point, because it brings you to a place of faith in Jesus. Now, his point is to destroy the ideology or the thought process that the Pharisees had so contaminated the people. Even today, this same thought pattern is in Christendom today. Through legalism, works, holiness, you have people focusing on just one aspect, right? Whether I got to be baptized in water, or I got to keep the Sabbath day, certain clothes I can't wear, right? No pants, jewelry, makeup, whatever. It's always, and again, it's man's effort to get to God. That's the problem. That when you think that it is by my effort, my human effort, and every false religion, that is the common denominator. That man in his own effort has to get to God, instead of believing the testimony that God gave of his son. In other words, the true religion that God accepts, that makes you righteous before God, is what God has done. And that's the error. That's the right there, the big line of demarcation. That if you think I always have to do something. All right. So I want to go to verse 31, and notice he says again. This is where we're going to pick it up. It's where we left off last time. We're going to pick it up. He says again, you have heard it was said to our ancestors, you must not break your oath. Oh, I want to kind of go back. I want to go back. I said I wanted to finish your thought. I'm going to go back to 31. It said, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce. But I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife except for the case of sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery with her. Now, this precept was, and Jesus, again, I'm going to save a more in-depth explanation when we get to the part where they confront Jesus with this question again. And they ask him, can a man divorce his wife for any cause? Well, first of all, it was never for any cause. And the original intent of God in terms of marriage was there was never going to be divorce. And Jesus brings that out. Now, Moses incorporated and gave one exception to the marriage. And that is, if one of the spouses was unfaithful, committed adultery, that would be grounds of divorce. Then Moses gave all kinds of other commands for that. So, for example, and again, it was slighted in favor of men more than it was for women. In other words, he really didn't say even. He never even said that a woman can divorce her husband. And so this was really what the man. So that if the man found uncleanness in his wife, he would just simply write out a piece of paper and hand it to her and send her on the way. And then Moses got into it in more detail and said, well, if she goes and marry another man, and then that man divorces, he can't come back to this man, and he goes all the way back. You get really entangled into the law of Moses. And that's what, they got away with that, though. The Pharisees got to the place where they were divorcing their wives, and again, this was typical of the Pharisees at this time, that they had become so hypocritical. There's another fancy word, cognitive dissonance. With the Pharisees were kind of the personification of that term, where you have two opposing thoughts or positions or opinions. So for example, you could say, I hate stealing, but you're stealing. Okay? And the Pharisees were that way. They were sticklers for the law, but yet violating the law, and then of course justifying why they were violating the law. And so at this point they were divorcing their wives for any reason. And this is why Jesus sort of kind of nails them on this. So he basically, again, he just reiterates the law. And remember, Jesus ministered under the Old Testament law, and then he would kind of wrap up the Old Testament law. Verse 33, again, you've heard that it was said by our ancestors, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oath to the Lord. But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it is God's throne, or by earth, because it is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great King. Now, in the Old Testament, they did have strict laws concerning if you make an oath. And even then, you didn't have to make an oath. Like one of the most probably sad stories you read was a guy by the name of Jephthah. And he made this oath. He said, Lord, if he's going to war, and he said, if you give me victory, the first thing I meet, I would offer it to you as a sacrifice. Won the war, and when he came back, it was his only daughter, his only child, his daughter. Now the people prevented him from, I believe the people prevented him from offering a sacrifice. But the point is that people would make oftentimes foolish oaths. Saul did it when he was fighting. He said, no one eats until we won the battle or won. And as a result of the soldiers were so tired, they were so, and they probably could have done better had they not been bound by this foolish oath. So the idea is that he says, it's better for you not to make an oath. Under the law, you didn't. But here's the thing. Under the law, if you made an oath, if you made an oath to God, you were bound by that oath, whatever it was. Now, Jesus again is saying, hey, just don't make an oath at all. Then he says, verse 36, neither should you swear by your head, because you cannot make a single head white or black. I often think about this, by the way, y'all. I think about when he says that you can't make your hair white or black. And then, in my mind, I start thinking, well, what about people that dye their hair? But then I think, well, wait a minute, the roots, right, always grow back, right? So, all right, that's just me being a little smart. All right, so he says, verse 37, but let your word be yes, and your no be no. Anything more than these is from the evil one. In other words, your word should be bond. Your word, when you say yes, it shouldn't be that you follow through with a whole bunch of oath and swearing and things like that. Now, we don't have a lot of issues with people taking oath and swearing today. One of the issues that used to come about was when you would be in court and people would hand you a Bible and they would say swear on the Bible, and Christians would go, oh, no, because Jesus told me not to swear. And that's why you hear people today say, in court, they give you the alternative saying affirm, okay? But Jesus speaking in terms of just your character, and this is really what he's talking about. He says, just as your character, your word should be bond. If you say yes, it should be yes. You shouldn't have to go, yes, and I swear on my kids, my mother, and everybody else. That's why he says, don't even bring me into it, right? Don't swear by Jerusalem, don't swear by God, don't swear by whatever. Your word should be bond. And that's his point. Now remember too, all of this that he's talking about is, here are the Pharisees' traditions and corruptions, but also remember, this is how you ought to be presenting yourself to the world as a witness. In other words, you shouldn't be known as a liar. You should be known as someone who breaks their word. Okay? There's a lot of depth we can go in there, especially Christian businessmen, right? All right. Verse 38 says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, this again, he's quoting Old Testament commandments. If you go back and you read them, these were matters of justice. So the law, in other words, what Moses was saying is that if you knock somebody's tooth out, your tooth should be knocked out. And so that's where the eye for an eye. And by the way, it was something that was judicated in the Mosaic judicial system. It was never somebody who took something up personally or vengeance. However, Jesus again, he's going to come along and raise the bar again. Verse 39, but I tell you, do not resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. As for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. And give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow. Now, in each one of these cases, when he says, again, and this, a lot of Christians are kind of troubled by that, because does this mean that we are so weak or docile that we let somebody beat on us? First, he wasn't talking about fighting in a fighting situation. The term slap would have been more so an insult, a challenge. The idea is, don't you react, and this is what he was trying to say right here. Don't you react. Don't resist. He said, if he slaps you, turn the other cheek. Then he said, if he wants to sue you, he said, let him take your shirt away too. Now, remember, he's speaking these in very generic terms as well. Remember, up there he just talked about settling cases. Here he says, if you want to sue. Now, why is he doing this? In other words, okay, be the peacemaker. Remember those Beatitudes? Be the peacemaker. Be merciful. Be gentle. Letting your light shine. That's what he has. That's what he has in way. Now, he says, give to everyone. Also, he said, if anyone forces you to go a mile, go with him too. They had a kind of a law. Let's say if you were carrying a load or something like that, and even they could come and say, hey, you know what? They could force you to go a mile. Rome had this law. So, for example, a soldier could come and say, hey, I want you to help me carry this. You kind of see this as an example when you get to the crucifixion of Jesus. When they force the man to carry the cross of Jesus. That's an example of the law. And legally they could do that. Hey, carry this cross. A soldier can come up and say, carry this cross. And that's what they did with this man. And he carried the cross of Jesus. Now, this wasn't only the cross. It could be anything. What Jesus is saying, okay, if they force you to go 1 mile, go 2. Now, again, these are very generic kind of sayings that he's not giving any type of kind of the stipulations to. And the whole point is, I'm letting my light shine, right? So, by the way, when that person slaps me and I turn the other cheek, they're seeing something, right? Give to everyone who asks. They're seeing something, right? If he force you to go 1 mile, go 2. That causes them to see something. But that, keep this in mind, it's in a very generic way too. So he says, give to everyone that asks, and don't turn away from one who wants to borrow from you. Then he says, verse 43, you have heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Now, again, if you go back to the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the sons of God. So he says, verse 45, so you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for he called this his son to rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the righteous, on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward would you have? Don't even tax collectors do the same? Now, it's kind of interesting, as Matthew is writing this, he's a tax collector, right? Verse 47, and if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing out of the ordinary? Don't even Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So, the hope, and again, keep this in mind, the reason why we're saying this is, why are we here? And isn't it amazing if you look at churches today, how close-knit, closed-circuit, closed-in churches are, right? That there are churches, and this is rather, whatever you want to look at, there are churches that never expand from their 4 walls, right? They never expand from their 4 walls. And then within the walls, you see what? The cliques, the classism, right? And he says right here, if you're just doing that, you know better than the world, you know better than the tax collectors. If you're only greeting your brothers, that's okay. Sinners do that. So what does he say? We are here to reach out to the unpleasant. We are here to reach out to the sinners. We're here to reach out to the world, to let our lights shine. That's what letting our lights shine look like. Letting our lights shine sometimes is uncomfortable. It's not the most glorious life at times. And I know that the ministers that have kind kind of made the Christian life like a glorious life, and that's subjective. We in America, yes, we live a pretty good life, but the same principle is still the same. We are to let our lights shine, and that's how we do it sometimes. Here's the interesting thing. When you look at all of these qualities that he just listed right here, the way that these kind of acts that he told us to do, the main thing is, if someone slaps us, how do we respond? If they're evil towards us, how do we respond? We respond in the godly way, because this is what we're showing them. We don't respond in our natural way. You curse me out, I'm going to curse you back out, right? That's what he's saying. You're not showing yourself. There's no salvation in yourself. So if but he says right here again, verse 44, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That right there is the thing. All right, guys, we're going to pick it up at chapter 6 in the next study. Excuse me. We're going to pick it up at if you're out there, Monique, got any questions before I sign out? If not, again, the way that we understand this Sermon on the Mount, and this is probably right here that people have probably the most kind of concern about or misunderstanding about. Well, just keep it in mind that what we have, or I should say, what is Jesus' point is, you're my disciples, you're lights to shine to the dark world, so that they can glorify God. Okay, so again, chapter 6, we're going to get into some more. Jesus is not finished So all right, guys. We'll see you in the next study, chapter 6 in the next study. All right, see you then.